Before even attempting crow pose, there are a couple of things that you need to know about arm balancing. We are all of different bodies and different minds, and the way we understand a certain arm balance is very different from the next person. What this video serves to do for you is to make arm balancing, or crow pose, because we're doing crow pose in this video, accessible to everyone. So you will be given a few progressions, you'll be given a range of tips, and what you will have to do is work with a certain tip or a certain technique that works for you best. Now with crow pose, number one, you start in a squatting position and your hands are right in front of you. You want your hands about shoulder width apart here so you have pretty good stability. We are keeping the feet on the ground to start with to allow you to explore and experience how work is when you start to put load on your hands. Once you start to get comfortable with this, that is when we lift our feet off. I have my hands in front of me, they're about shoulder width apart. What happens here is I want to aim to get my elbows right above my wrist, but this will not happen if I'm just resting into the pose. You want to try to keep the stability in the pose by really squeezing your armpits in as if you've got a piece of paper under your armpits and you're trying to hold it in place. This would mean your elbows move towards each other in the position itself to stabilize your shoulder girdle and not allow any form of wobbliness. When there is a form of wobbliness, there is a risk of face planting, and we don't want to do that. So really draw the elbows in and squeeze the armpits to hold your position there. Once you've set yourself in this position, I take the inner part of my knees for now. We can work with progressions later, but if you're just attempting the crow pose, you take the inner parts of your knees onto your triceps or your upper arms, and from here you lift your hip, and all you're doing while maintaining the squeeze in your armpits is to try to shift your elbows right above your wrist. Your feet stay on the ground, they don't come off. Your elbows are above your wrist and you hold it here. Now, when you do this, when you shift that weight forward and when you finally get your elbows over your wrist, what you're going to feel is a lot of pressure in your fingertips. This is what we want. Hand balancing is a lot about distributing the weight around your hands, and there's going to be a lot of weight shift forward and back. So for now, we are going to get comfortable with getting the weight onto your fingertips. Once again, my hands are firm on the ground, my elbows are drawn in, I lift my hip, inner part of the knees on my upper arms, and I shift my weight forward to bring the elbows above the wrist. I hold it here. Now the biggest thing about arm balancing is that you want to work towards endurance. So it is not about, as I said in the beginning of the video, it is not about practicing that pose over and over again and trying to jump into the position, because that the likelihood of you getting the pose by doing that is very, very slim. So moving into it like I just did and holding it for a specific set of time. So for example, if you're just beginning, let's say you hold it for 10 seconds. This will start to build endurance. Hold it for 10 seconds for about 3 to 4 sets, and then start to increase the time. The more you build that strength, the more you build the endurance. You don't even need to jump into crow pose. Your feet will start to come off. Yeah, this is option number one. Option number two is have an elevation. This changes the dynamics of the pose, and the sensation you feel in the pose also changes. The only thing with this though is that if you're still working on your strength, what happens if your shoulders are well, you're still working on that. I don't want to say weak, so you're still working on that strength, and your shoulders are still doing some work to get to a point where they're strong enough to hold your weight up. If you don't have that yet, what you will feel, the sensation you will feel, is a lot of instability where there is a lot of wobble present. So there will be a lot of wobble, and then your arms will flare out, and then you will face plant. And I'm sure a lot of you, if you've tried your crow pose before and failed at getting up into crow pose, you would have experienced this. If you haven't experienced this, if at all you experience after watching this video, you will know what I mean. So that's why I say that is very, very important. Okay, let's move on to option 2 now. Option 2 is elevation of the feet. Elevation of the feet, totally different dynamic. Sometimes for certain people, the feet on the ground doesn't work, so they elevate their feet. For some people, elevating their feet is harder than your feet on the ground. So it's very individual. You need to try out both, and you need to see what works for you the most. Now, my feet are elevated. They are on the blocks here. My hands are on the ground, shoulder width apart, and I'm doing the same thing here. I'm drawing my elbows in and really squeezing my armpits. The inner part of my knees are on my upper arms, and then I shift to take my elbows above my wrist. Now here, I already feel my feet are a lot lighter. Like I said, dynamics change when you elevate your feet. Now, if you feel your feet are very light and you feel like you can take your feet off, go ahead and try lifting the feet off. If you're already there, all good. But if you're not there, even the act of touching, so even if it's just caressing the block, even if your toes are just wiggling over the block without much of a hover, that is still a step closer to taking your feet off. What needs to happen here, again, you want to build the endurance and the strength by holding this for time. You can start with 10 seconds, even if it's feet assisted. 10 seconds is a good place to start with. So if you can't, if there is a certain progression that you can't hold for 10 seconds and you just get maybe a 1 or 2 second hold or a split second hold, I want you to regress and give yourself a little bit more assistance with the feet to try and hold this here for 10 seconds. Once you start to increase that 10 seconds to 12, 15, 20 seconds, then you will quickly see that you are able to lift the feet off and hold it for a good 5 seconds. So that is what we are building towards. One more time, I will do this on the blocks. Hands firm, draw the elbows in, inner thighs on your upper arms, and shift that weight forward by drawing the elbows over the wrist. So elbows are over the wrist and you're holding it here. Again, a lot of weight in the hands, and you will start to feel the fingertips start to claw into the ground as well. And if that is happening, good, please maintain that. Now, another thing that you need to know when you go into your crow pose, sorry I didn't mention this before, I should mention it before I move on to the next progression, is that as you shift the weight forward with the elbows over the wrist, there should be a lot of chin looking forward. You need to keep looking forward, because if you look back, you're going to flip over as you shift that weight forward. So you're thinking, I look forward and I shift it forward rather than in this position. Because what happens when you're looking back, changing gazes does a whole lot of difference, makes a whole lot of difference for the poses that you do, for the arm balances that you do. And looking forward is the first step in your arm balance practice. We can start changing gazes as we start to progress, but for now I want you to focus on looking forward, because if you look back, you keep the weight back. The weight stays back, and it's going to make it a lot harder for you to lift your feet. Also, another risk is that you will fall over because you have no gauge of your weight shift. So keep looking forward. Now, moving on. So you've done this. It's pretty easy. You feel like you want to move on to the next progression of crow pose. Now, the next one is knees on triceps, directly on triceps. So what the first progression does for you, so the inner thighs on your upper arms, what that does for you is gives you a little bit of cushion, and you are a little closer to the ground by doing that, so you get a little bit more balanced. When you start to place your knees on your triceps, this again changes the dynamics of the pose a little bit more. You're a little bit higher up, and you've got your knee, which is a hard part of your body, pressing into your triceps. So there is going to be a little bit of pressure as well, if not pain, because some people do feel the pain, but if you don't, all well and good. I start off the same way. So I'm going to give you both options, from the ground and from an elevated surface. So I start off the same way, hands on the ground, drawing the elbows in. I keep a hip up. And now what I do is I take my triceps as close to my armpits as possible. I will explain to you in a bit why I take it as close to the armpits as possible. Yeah. So I am in this position. I shift my weight forward and I take my elbows above my wrist. I come off. Now the moment you try this, knee as close to the armpits as possible, you will feel a whole different sensation in your anterior chain. So anterior chain is your front body. There will be a whole different sensation coming from your hip flexors right up your torso. And you can immediately see why this would be a harder, you can immediately feel why this would be a harder version of the initial crow that we just practiced. Second option, on an elevated surface. Again here, knees close to your upper arms, close to your I'm sorry about the honking. So knees close to your armpits, shift the weight forward and take your elbows above your wrist. That is your second option. So we've got second option of knees on your triceps rather than the initial parts that we did with the inner part of your knees. So these are the four of the crow poses the four options that you can try out. What you need to do is you need to understand and you need to find an option that works for you, that you can do, but it is challenging. So how progressions happen is if you challenge the body and you try to push it that much further, that is when these progressions start to happen. That is when you start to progress, that is when you start to move on to the next level. You don't want to stay in a spot where everything's easy and you can do everything. So you want to work to the next level here. So again, whether you're doing inner thigh, inner part of the knees on your upper arms, or you're doing knees on triceps, it doesn't matter. Work with a time. So for now, 3 to 4 sets of 10-second holds is enough. But if you feel like you can go for longer, feet assisted, go for longer, no problem. Now, moving on to feet off the ground. So I've already got, I've already done feet assisted. With the feet assisted, what you really need to think of is to keep the feet as light as possible. Like I said, any form of contact with the ground or with an elevated surface is going to change the dynamics of the pose. And it's going to give you a whole different experience. So if your feet come off, This may mean you hold it for a significantly lesser time. For example, if you're doing feet assist for 15 seconds, you may just do unsupported for 5 seconds, and that's fine, because that is where you can gauge how long you're holding it for. You go 5-second hold, and then the next time you try for a 6-second hold, and then you try for a 7-second hold. So moving on, so my knees on my triceps here, I shift the weight forward, and once I feel my feet getting light, I lift up and I draw my knees towards my butt. Now the whole time here, I've got weight distributed through my hands pretty evenly, and I'm really drawing my elbows in towards each other to stabilize that shoulder girdle, because remember, any wobbliness would mean you will lose the pose. So keep with feet assisted until you hit a certain amount of time. 10 seconds is a very good time, 15 seconds is a very good time, and once you start to feel stability in feet assisted, the feet can come off. So remember, it's not about feet coming off and holding it for a split second. We want to try to stabilize in the pose, so work with the stability. And also I forgot, so I did say I would explain about the knees being close to the armpits in your crow pose. The reason for that is, when you start to take your knees closer, your knees to your triceps, we want to place it closer to the armpits, because when you start to do transitions like a crow into handstand, or your jump backs, or any of the transitions that involve crow pose, it will be a lot easier if you've got your knees closer to the armpits, and it will be a lot more efficient. It doesn't really matter at this point where your knee is placed. If you're doing knees on triceps for the first time, at this point it doesn't really matter, but we would like to work towards keeping the knees closer to the armpits. This will require a good amount of compression strength though, and that is for another video. So compression strength is your ability to keep the thighs as close to the body as possible. This will require a fair bit of compression strength, and if you've got if you're still working on the strength of your hip flexors, or you've got pretty tight hip flexors that will not allow you to draw the knees as close to the body as possible, knees close to armpits is going to be a bit of a challenge. So work with any part of your arms to start with, and then as you start to progress and you start to increase your strength and stability, we can move closer to your armpits. And that's your crow pose. I hope this video has helped you. Well, comment below if you've got any questions, and we will respond to you as soon as possible.